The rain fell like static against the glass, soft enough to be forgotten, yet loud enough to fill the silence between them. The office was minimalist gray walls, a single fern wilting under artificial light, and the smell of mint tea, a half drunk on the table, between two people who were strangers by profession but dangerously close by soul. Dr. Eliza Hart adjusted her glasses and wrote on the yellow notepad in front of her patient 07C, emotional detachment recurring insomnia. The pen left a faint tremor where her hand hesitated. Across from her sat Nathan Cole, 32, founder of Mindwell Technologies, the company that had made millions teaching artificial intelligence how to simulate empathy. He wore the kind of suit that didn't wrinkle, the kind that announced quiet control. But his eyes told a different story, bloodshot, unfocused, almost defiant in their refusal to blink. The air between them vibrated with something unsaid. He stared at the rain beyond the window, as if it might speak before he did. Finally he said it, almost too softly to be caught. "I haven't had sex in 8 months. The sentence hung there, intimate and surgical at once, slicing through the clinical quiet. Eliza froze. Her pen stopped mid-word. She'd heard confessions before of betrayal, addiction, grief, but never one that came out so bare, so unguarded. She forced her voice steady. "Why do you think that matters to you?" He didn't look at her. "Because it used to. I used to want. I used to feel." His tone was detached, like he was describing someone else's body. "Now I don't. It's not the body that's broken, Dr. Hart. It's the part of me that used to care." Eliza swallowed, watching the reflection of the city's neon lights slide across the surface of his eyes. Outside, Seattle was drowning in another storm. Inside, the man who could afford to buy silence was trying to fill it with truth. She asked, "When did it start, the disconnection?" He leaned back, exhaling through his nose. "After the accident, everyone called it tragedy. I called it clarity." "The accident," she repeated, carefully searching for the right opening. "You mean the one the news called, the one that killed my fiancé?" "Yes, he cut her off. The crash no one was supposed to know I caused." His jaw clenched, and for a second Eliza thought she heard his composure crack like thin ice. But then he smiled, a hollow, practiced curve of the lips. "You won't write that down, will you?" Eliza didn't answer. Her pen hovered above the notepad, trembling slightly. He chuckled, almost amused by her hesitation. "You can. Everyone else already did. It's on 100 servers by now, buried under NDAs and PR statements." He turned his gaze back to the rain. "But this is the first time I've said it out loud." Silence expanded, filling every corner of the room, until the ticking of the clock grew intrusive. Eliza studied him, the way he rested his fingers on the edge of his chair, rigid but deliberate, like he was holding himself together through sheer geometry. "Do you ever think about forgiveness?" she asked quietly. He glanced at her reflection in the window rather than her face. "Forgiveness is for the living, Dr. Hart. I'm not sure I qualify." She wanted to push, but the instinct that made her a good therapist, the same one that often got her in trouble, told her not to. Instead, she said, "You do qualify, Nathan. You're here." He tilted his head, eyes narrowing with faint amusement. "That's a dangerously optimistic assessment for someone who doesn't believe in miracles." "I believe in work," she replied. "The kind that hurts before it heals." He smiled again, this time faint but genuine. "Then I suppose we'll see how much pain I can afford." Her notepad caught a drop of tea as the air conditioner clicked off. For a brief second, the room became too quiet. Eliza's pulse echoed in her throat. Nathan's confession lingered like static between frequencies impossible to tune out, impossible to answer. She closed the session with the neutral tone they taught in school, but rarely practiced in real life. "That's all for tonight, Mr. Cole. Same time next week." He nodded, stood, and buttoned his jacket. The smell of rain followed him to the door. As he left, he said softly without turning, "You write that line down too, don't you?" "The one about caring, yes," she said before she could stop herself. "Good," he murmured. "Maybe it'll remind me." I said it. The door closed with a click that sounded too final. Eliza sat there long after he was gone, watching the condensation form on the glass, each drop tracing a path that vanished halfway down. She opened a new page in her notes and wrote a single sentence. "That was the night I realized the richest man in the city was the loneliest soul I'd ever met." Her voice echoed in her mind as if narrating a story she didn't yet understand. The next morning, her phone vibrated before sunrise. It was Jonas Vale, her supervisor at Mindwell. "Eliza, I need you at HQ now." His voice was clipped urgent. "Why the system's been breached. Client data, sensitive sessions." Her stomach dropped. "Which session's yours?" he said. "Specifically a recording labeled Patient 007C. She went cold. "That's impossible. The file's encrypted. Not anymore. Someone uploaded excerpts to an anonymous forum." "What kind of excerpts?" she whispered. Jonas hesitated. "Enough to make headlines. Every outlet in Seattle's running it already." She opened her laptop with shaking hands. The screen flooded with the headline, in bold white letters, "Anonymous Billionaire Confesses Emotional Dysfunction in Therapy. Mindwell Data Leak Exposes Privacy Scandal." Beneath it, a blurred still frame from the session, Nathan's profile half lit by the city's glow. His voice transcribed below, "I haven't had sex in 8 months." The world had heard his confession, and for the first time, Eliza realized the rain outside wasn't just weather. It was warning. Nathan Cole lived in a glass box above Lake Union, where the rain never stopped and the silence never left. The penthouse was all angles and glass, a reflection of himself, clean, efficient, and utterly void of warmth. Every morning began with the same ritual: black coffee, 3 emails to board members, and a 15-minute scan of sentiment data from Mindwell's user base. Millions of people poured their hearts into the app he'd created, confessing loneliness to an algorithm he'd designed to sound compassionate. Ironically, the man who invented digital empathy hadn't felt a pulse of genuine connection in over a year. When he wasn't working, he pretended to sleep. He would lie there on Egyptian cotton sheets, staring at the ceiling's dim light panels, waiting for his brain to quiet, but it never did. Sleep had become another performance. The city moved around him in muted graze people, rushing to exist while he simply maintained. The news channels ran his photo again, that morning grainy from the leaked therapy footage. "Anonymous Billionaire Admits Emotional Dysfunction." Speculation about his collapse filled comment sections with a mixture of awe-mockery and fascination. Lydia Park, his communications director, had called 6 times before breakfast. "Nathan, we need to issue a statement. Say it was edited. Say it's not you, it's me," he replied, his voice flat. "Then we need damage control." "No," he said. "We need silence. Noise only feeds itself." Lydia hesitated, then exhaled sharply. "You're trending worldwide. They're calling you the Hollow Healer." Nathan closed the call and stared at his reflection in the black glass of the window. The nickname almost sounded poetic. In the reflection, his face looked older than 32, drawn hollow, sculpted by insomnia and guilt. Somewhere beneath the tailored perfection, there was a man who had forgotten how to feel anything that didn't burn. Later that afternoon, he stood before a wall of screens in his private lab. Streams of user data pulsed across them. Heart rates, stress levels, voice tones from therapy, AI sessions. Every number told a story of pain. MindWell had been built to measure emotion, but it couldn't create it. He pressed a button, muting the digital voices that had become his substitute for empathy. The sudden silence was deafening. He turned toward the window again and remembered Eliza's question from the night before. When was the last time you touched someone and meant it? The memory hit harder than expected. He'd seen hundreds of therapists over the years, professionals who spoke in algorithms of comfort, but none of them had looked at him the way she had. Not with pity, not with fascination, with quiet understanding. That alone scared him. By evening, his inbox overflowed with internal memos from legal teams, PR advisors, and investors. Everyone demanded a reaction. Instead, Nathan drove. He didn't know where he was going until the road led him to a small overlook on Queen Anne Hill, the same spot where he used to bring his fiancée Clara before everything shattered. The city lights shimmered below a galaxy trapped under glass. The ghost of her laughter hung in the air. He remembered her last words before she slammed the car door that night. "You care more about your company than my life." 15 minutes later, the crash echoed down the highway, and everything he'd built since then had been an apology no one could hear. The rain started again, soft at first, then relentless. Nathan stepped out of the car and let it soak him, his tailored suit clinging to his skin. It was the only time he felt real, the chill, the sting, the weight of water pressing down. When he finally went home, the city was asleep. He poured whiskey into a glass and sat by the window, watching the storm blur the skyline. For a brief second, he imagined Eliza's office again, the fern, the faint scent of tea, the way she didn't flinch when he told her the truth. He wanted to hate her for asking questions that mattered. Instead, he found himself waiting for their next session. Across town, Eliza sat in her dim apartment, surrounded by case notes replaying his words in her head. "It's not the body that's broken, it's the part of me that used to care." She'd read trauma case studies that sounded clinical theoretical, but Nathan's version of detachment was human and haunting. She wondered what it must feel like to build an empire out of healing while being the only one left unhealed. She opened his file again, Nathan Cole, CEO, MindWell Technologies. History of trauma, suppressed guilt, unresolved bereavement. She should have felt professional curiosity. Instead, she felt an ache that had nothing to do with duty. Jonas's warning from the previous day echoed, "Don't get emotionally involved." These people pay for empathy, not connection. But Jonas had never sat in that office while the richest man in the city confessed his emptiness to a woman who could barely afford her rent. The irony wasn't lost on her. The second session came faster than either of them expected. Nathan arrived early, his eyes ringed with exhaustion, but calmer than before. He didn't bother with formalities. "Before we start, can I ask you something?" She nodded. "When was the last time you felt something that scared you?" The question caught her off guard. "That's not relevant to—" "It is," he interrupted. "You study emotions for a living. You must feel something." Eliza hesitated. "Last year, my father's memorial service, I was asked to speak and couldn't say a word." "Why not?" "Because words didn't fit what I felt." Nathan nodded slowly. That's exactly what I mean. Feelings without language. That's the part I've lost. He looked down at his hands, turning them over, as if inspecting a malfunctioning machine. I can replicate compassion in code, simulate grief, even predict remorse. But I can't experience it, not anymore. His honesty wasn't arrogance, it was surrender. Eliza leaned forward slightly, her voice steady. Maybe it's not gone, maybe it's buried. He met her eyes for the first time. And if I start digging, then we'll see what's still alive down there. The silence that followed wasn't empty this time. It was breathing alive with tension and something neither could name. When he left, the rain had stopped leaving behind a rare sliver of sunlight cutting through the clouds. Nathan paused by the window, watching it reflect on her glasses. "Do you ever get tired of fixing people?" he asked. "I don't fix them," she said. "I remind them they're not broken." He considered that for a moment, then whispered, "Maybe that's worse." He walked out before she could respond. When the door closed, Eliza exhaled the breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Outside, the sun disappeared again. Inside, two lives began orbiting the same quiet storm. The night settled over Seattle like a heavy quilt, stitched with streetlight and rain. Eliza Hart sat by her apartment window, the soft hum of the city filling the silence Nathan had left behind. Her small one-bedroom space carried the scent of chamomile and ink, a reflection of a woman who spent more time listening to other people's pain than tending her own. A framed photograph leaned against the wall instead of hanging on it. Her father in his police uniform, his smile halfway there, as if he wasn't sure he deserved the picture. She had promised herself that one day she would understand what drove him to end his life, when everyone thought he was the strongest man in the room. That promise had led her here to therapy to mind well, to rooms where silence spoke louder than words. She traced the rim of her tea mug and thought of Nathan's face, the way his voice cracked when he said forgiveness was for the living. Something in him had reminded her of her father's last night. Quiet, contained, polite to the point of tragedy. The next morning she met Jonas Vale in his office at headquarters, a space that smelled of antiseptic ambition. The walls were glass, the view panoramic. The man behind the desk perfectly pressed and smiling without warmth. "You're handling the fallout well," he said, tapping his fingers against a folder labeled Patient Euro 7C. "The leak is a disaster, but at least the narrative's controlled," Eliza repeated. "Someone violated confidentiality. They turned a human being's breakdown into clickbait." Jonas leaned back, unconcerned. "Nathan Cole is not a victim. He's a billionaire. He'll survive. The real concern is the company's image. We can't afford any emotional contagion." She frowned. Emotional contagion. It's what happens when empathy spreads too far. It clouds judgment. Keep your distance, Hart. These people pay for empathy, not connection. The sentence hit her like a slap. With respect, she said slowly, connection is the point. Not for us, for them. He closed the folder with a final click. "You're young, idealistic. That's dangerous in our field." "You mean inconvenient," she murmured more to herself than to him. He smiled without acknowledging the remark. "Your patient will either recover or relapse. Either way, we keep the lights on." As she left the office, Eliza felt something cold spread through her chest. The same chill she'd felt at her father's funeral, when a senior officer told her, "Some people just break quietly." That was the day she swore she would never treat pain as an acceptable statistic. Back at her apartment, she opened her journal, a private record. She kept separate from her clinical notes. She wrote, "There's a difference between detachment and decay. One protects, the other kills." Her handwriting wavered slightly as she continued. Nathan Cole doesn't need another algorithm to explain him. He needs permission to feel without being punished for it. She set the pen down, realizing how far she'd already crossed the invisible line Jonas warned her about. She wasn't supposed to care, but she did. She cared about the way Nathan's words lingered about the flicker of life behind his exhaustion, about the quiet desperation that mirrored her own. Later that evening, she attended the Mindwell staff dinner, a polished event meant to display calm professionalism after the scandal. Lydia Park was there, too radiant in a way that made everyone else look faded. She approached Eliza with a smile, sharp enough to cut glass. "Dr. Hartwright, the therapist of the hour." "That's not funny," Eliza said softly. "You're right, it's tragic." Lydia sipped her wine. "He trusts you, that's rare, but don't mistake attention for affection. Men like Nathan use sincerity like currency. When it stops buying them peace, they move on." Eliza's jaw tightened. "Maybe he's not like other men." Lydia tilted her head. "Maybe you want him not to be." The words landed too close to truth. Eliza left the event early, escaping the artificial laughter that filled the hall. Outside the city was wrapped in fog. She walked until her heels ached, until she reached the pier where the lake met the skyline. The air tasted of salt and electric rain. She took out her phone thumb, hovering over Nathan's number, but stopped. Therapists don't call patients. Patients don't call therapists. That was the rule. She slipped the phone back into her coat and whispered to the empty air. "Sometimes empathy is the only thing that keeps people alive." Her voice trembled slightly. The wind carried it away. At home, she opened her notebook again and added a single line under her earlier entry: "Empathy saves others. Connection saves both." Across town, Nathan sat in his dark penthouse, reading the online headlines about himself. Each story stripped him further of humanity, turning his pain into entertainment. He closed his laptop and, for the first time in months, reached for his phone. His thumb hovered over a contact marked Dr. E.H. He didn't press call, but the impulse alone scared him. He set the phone down, staring at it as if it might burn. In two different rooms, divided by miles of city lights, two people sat in silence, thinking of each other and pretending they weren't. Eliza couldn't sleep. The rain started again around midnight, tapping against her window in a rhythm that matched her heartbeat. She lay there staring at the ceiling and imagined her father sitting at his desk the night he died a gun, beside an unfinished letter that began, "I'm sorry I wasn't stronger." She never read the rest. The ink had bled when the paramedics arrived. Maybe Nathan wasn't just another patient. Maybe he was her chance to keep a promise made long ago, to understand the quiet before the breaking point and stop it before it claimed someone else. When dawn came, she brewed coffee and stared at her reflection in the kitchen window. Her eyes looked older than 28. She smiled without humor and whispered, "You're not supposed to care." But she did. The third session began with rain again, soft against the glass walls of the office, like someone drumming their fingers on a secret. Nathan Cole arrived early, wearing a charcoal coat that looked like it had been tailored to withstand judgment. He didn't speak for almost 5 minutes. Eliza watched the reflection of the storm ripple across his face, wondering which would break first, the sky or him. When he finally spoke, His voice was low enough to make her lean forward. "Do you ever think silence can be loud?" She looked up from her notes. "Yes, especially when someone's drowning in it." He gave a faint nod, like she'd just confirmed a suspicion. "That's what it's like at home. Quiet. Except for her voice." Eliza hesitated. "Your fiancé?" He nodded again, eyes fixed on a memory. "Clara. She had this habit of humming while she worked. Always the same song. When she died, the sound didn't stop. It just got stuck in my head." His hand moved slightly, tapping the rhythm against his thigh. "I still hear it when the city goes quiet, like she's reminding me I'm not forgiven." Eliza's throat tightened. Forgiveness isn't something she has to give Nathan. It's something you give yourself. And what if I don't deserve it? Then you start acting like someone who might. The words hung in the air between them. Nathan laughed softly, not mocking, just weary. "You make it sound easy." "It isn't," she said, "but neither is hating yourself forever." The session shifted. Nathan began to talk, not in polished sentences, but in fragments images. The sound of metal twisting, the smell of gasoline, the way headlights looked through tears. The night of the accident unfolded in pieces too raw to belong to a press release. "We argued," he said. "She wanted me to leave the company. Said it was turning me into someone she didn't recognize." She was right. But I told her she was jealous, that she couldn't understand pressure. He paused. She got in the car. I didn't stop her. I watched her taillights disappear, and then he stopped, his voice breaking for the first time. Then I heard the crash from our balcony. The sentence dropped like a stone. Eliza didn't move. She wanted to reach for him, but didn't. Some moments weren't meant to be touched. He pressed a hand against his chest. "People tell you grief fades. It doesn't. It just finds better hiding places. You're not broken, Nathan," she said softly. "You're grieving." He looked at her, then really looked, eyes red but sharp. "You keep saying that like it's supposed to make it better." "No," she said. "It's supposed to make it real." He exhaled, a sound closer to a sob than a breath. Eliza offered him a tissue. He didn't take it. Instead, he whispered, "Do you ever wonder if healing feels like betrayal? Like moving on means leaving them behind?" She felt that question in her bones. She thought of her father, of the photograph on her wall. "Yes," she said quietly, "every day." For a moment, their pain mirrored each other so clearly that the line between therapist and patient blurred into something human. The clock ticked once, twice, before Nathan's voice returned, softer now. "I built a billion-dollar company to help people feel better. I can tell anyone how to regulate emotion, how to process trauma. But when it comes to me, I can't even breathe without thinking of her." "That's because you're still loving her in the only way you know how, through guilt." He blinked. "What am I supposed to do instead?" "Remember her without punishing yourself for surviving." The simplicity of it disarmed him. He turned away, running a hand through his hair. "That sounds impossible." "Most healing does," she said, "until it doesn't." The rain thickened outside, drumming harder, like applause or warning. Nathan stood suddenly, pacing near the window. "What if the world never lets me forget? They turned my grief into gossip, my therapy into entertainment. There's no room left for privacy, only spectacle." "Then this room has to be different," Eliza said. "Here you don't perform, you exist." He stared at her, and something in his expression changed. Not desire, not pity, but recognition. "You really believe that I have to," she replied. "Otherwise, I'm just another person pretending to help." His laughter came out rough. "You're either brave or naive. both, she admitted. That's the only way therapy works. He stopped pacing, hands in pockets, head bowed as if the weight of his own body had become too much. When Clara died, I promised I'd never feel that much again. It nearly killed me. And now he looked up. Now I'm starting to feel again, and it's worse. It's not worse, she said gently. It's alive. He stared at her a long time. The air grew thick, charged with something fragile. When the clock chimed, neither moved to end the session. Finally, Nathan reached for the doorknob, but didn't turn it. "Thank you," he said, voice rough. "For what? For not fixing me." She smiled faintly. "That's not my job." He opened the door and paused once more. "Then what is to remind you you're not beyond repair?" The door closed behind him. Eliza sat still, the sound of rain filling the room. She opened her notebook and wrote a single line. "He doesn't need to be healed. He needs to be forgiven." Outside, the storm eased. Inside, something had shifted quietly and dangerously beautifully. The bouquet arrived on a Tuesday morning, wrapped in gray paper and silence. No note, just a single card that read, "For the only person who listens without fixing." Eliza stared at it too long before placing it beside the fern on her desk. The flowers were white tulips, understated and impossibly deliberate. She didn't need a signature to know who had sent them. Her first instinct was to report it, to do what the ethical code demanded, but something stopped her, a flicker of recognition, or maybe rebellion. She inhaled their scent, fresh and faintly sweet, then turned to the window where Seattle shimmered beneath thin daylight. The rain had paused as if to listen. At noon, Jonas called her into his office. He looked immaculate, pressed and tired of managing idealists. "You got flowers," he said without preamble. "Nathan Cole sends them to everyone who makes him feel human for 5 minutes. Don't let it get to your head." She folded her arms. "He's a patient, not a donor. He's also a PR nightmare." Jonas's tone sharpened. "We can't afford another scandal, especially not now. Handle it quietly. No written acknowledgement, no visible reaction. And for God's sake, no personal involvement. I haven't broken any rules." "Not yet," he said. "But you will if you're not careful." She wanted to argue but didn't. She left his office with her pulse unsteady, as if someone had drawn a line across her heart and warned her not to cross it. That evening, the Mindwell Foundation hosted a charity gala downtown. A night of tailored suits, champagne smiles, and speeches about mental health by people who hadn't cried in years. Eliza had been asked to attend as a show of solidarity, a quiet reminder that their team of professionals could still stand tall after the leak. She wore a simple black dress and kept to the corners, avoiding the press and the hollow laughter that echoed off glass walls. Then she saw him, Nathan Cole, standing under the chandelier's glow, the living contradiction of ruin and composure. Every head turned when he entered, as though gravity itself had adjusted to him. Their eyes met across the room, just 1 second, a glance threaded with memory. And suddenly the noise around her disappeared. He moved through the crowd with deliberate calm, acknowledging greetings with nods, never smiles. When he reached her, the orchestra softened as if conspiring. "Dr. Hart," he said quietly, "I didn't expect to see you here. I could say the same. Lydia thought my appearance might help with the company's image. Redemption through visibility." He paused, studying her face. "You look like you'd rather be anywhere else. I don't like pretending everything's fine." "Then don't," he said. "Most people can't tell the difference anyway." They stood close enough that she could smell the rain still clinging to his coat. His voice dropped lower. In your room you listen, but who listens to you? Her throat tightened. That's not how therapy works. Maybe it should be. For a moment, neither spoke. The music swelled. Waiters passed with trays of crystal glasses. Around them, the world continued performing. He looked down at the tulips on her wrist, a corsage someone from the staff had pinned there earlier, and his expression softened. White tulips, he murmured. You kept them. They were beautiful, she said simply. It felt wrong to throw them away. He smiled faintly. Beauty rarely survives rules. Before she could answer, Lydia appeared beside them, her tone all charm and calculation. Nathan, the board's waiting for your speech. He nodded politely, then turned back to Eliza. Will you stay? She hesitated. I'm not sure that's appropriate. Neither is living half a life, he said, then walked away. His speech that night was measured, eloquent, the kind of vulnerability that sounded rehearsed yet carried truth beneath the polish. We live in a world that mistakes silence for strength, he told the crowd. But healing begins when someone dares to speak. Applause followed. Cameras flashed. Eliza watched him from the edge of the room, caught between admiration and concern. When the event ended, she slipped out before the photographers found her. Outside, the rain had returned thin needles of silver under the streetlights. She stood beneath the awning, watching the city blur into motion when a familiar voice spoke behind her. You forgot your umbrella. Nathan held it out, his hair damp, his tie loosened. You shouldn't walk alone in this weather. I'm fine, she said, though her voice betrayed her. You're shaking. It's cold. It's fear, he corrected softly. Of what? Of feeling too much. The words cut too cleanly. She didn't answer. He stepped closer still, keeping the umbrella between them like a fragile boundary. You think I don't know the rules, he said, but I do. You're the one who believes they protect you. They don't. Boundaries exist for a reason. So does connection. Their eyes locked, rain cascading around them in luminous sheets. You don't have to fix me, he said quietly. Just don't pretend you don't see me. She drew a shaky breath. I do see you, Nathan. That's what scares me. He nodded slowly, almost sadly. Then we're both afraid of the same thing. A car horn broke the silence. She stepped back, breaking the invisible thread between them. You should go, she said. Good night, Mr. Cole. He hesitated before turning away. It's Nathan, he said, his voice barely audible. When it's just us, it's Nathan. She watched him disappear into the blur of headlights, her reflection trembling in the puddles. That night she couldn't sleep. She replayed every word, every look, until her own mind felt like a crowded room. Somewhere between fear and longing, she realized the truth Jonas had warned her about connection had already crossed the line. She opened her notebook and wrote, Some boundaries aren't broken. They dissolve. Across the city, Nathan poured whiskey into a glass and stared at the screensaver of his computer, a black void rotating with fragments of light. He remembered her voice, calm and relentless, telling him to remember without punishment. For the first time in months, he felt something raw beneath the numbness. Not desire, not guilt, but ache. The kind that comes before a storm. Morning hovered over Seattle in a pale gray that made everything look like a memory, and Eliza walked to work with the tulips folded inside brown paper, unsure whether she was keeping them for beauty or for proof. She told herself to focus on intake reports on the endless stream of people who needed her attention. But each hour curved toward the same point on the clock, the same door, the same name written on her roster. When Nathan arrived for their next session, he looked both lighter and more exhausted, as if he had set down one burden only to discover another beneath it. He sat without speaking, studied the fern, traced the rim of his water glass with a finger, then asked the kind of question patients rarely asked. What made you choose to heal broken people? She steadied her breathing. Because I could not save the first one. His gaze lifted, and the room seemed to inhale. Your father, he said, not as a guess, but as an understanding, and she nodded. He asked how it happened, and she shook her head, not ready to place those pictures on the table between them. He did not push. Instead, he told her about the habit of standing at windows, about the way grief collected in corners and ceilings, about the nights he stood over the sink and felt like a stranger in his own body. She told him about quiet houses and how silence can press on the lungs like water. The conversation moved without friction, two currents folding into each other until the hours closed around them. When he left, she wrote a note in her private journal that was not a clinical observation. Sometimes two people meet in the middle of a sentence they did not know they were both writing. That evening, she stayed late to reconcile digital files after another compliance email warned of heightened risk. The system displayed a blinking icon beside patient 07C. She opened it to find a request from legal to mirror the session archives to a review server. Every instinct told her no. The last leak had already taken a confession and fed it to strangers. She copied the original files to an encrypted drive and removed the mirrored path, a small betrayal committed in the name of mercy. She told herself it was not deception so much as protection. The lie slotted into place like a spare rib. On her way out, she passed Jonas in the corridor. He looked at the tote on her shoulder and the key card still in her hand and smiled with the kind of politeness that always sounded like a verdict. Burning the midnight oil for the cause, he said. She answered that paperwork did not do itself. He stepped closer, voice low. Our legal team needs full copies of your 07C sessions. She replied that she had already acknowledged the request and that she would submit a summary by morning. He held her eyes. The request was not for a summary. We need the raw material. She felt the floor tilt. For internal review, he added, and for the safety of the brand. She said the word brand as if it were a diagnosis and walked away before her face could betray her. Outside, the wind came in off the lake like a warning. She told herself that sleep would dissolve the anxiety, but sleep did not come. And when morning finally pried open the window shade, she felt as though she had borrowed time and forgotten to return it. The following session began with Nathan studying the outline of his hands, as if they were a map he could no longer read. He asked if she ever felt like a passenger in her own life. She said yes when fear drives. He gave a quiet, almost smile. Then I am always in the back seat. She decided to offer something real, a small piece of herself, in exchange for the faith he had shown. My father left a note, she said, but the rain got to it before we did. The ink bled until the words turned into shapes, and sometimes I think that is the most honest thing paper ever did. He looked at her, a look without pity, and said that he understood how a message could be both present and unreadable. After that, the room warmed not with romance, but with a gentler gravity. They discussed practical rituals, the making of small anchors, the way breath can be trained to hold the body through panic. And he listened as if he were memorizing a new language. When he asked whether forgiveness could be practiced like breathing, she told him yes, but that most people hold it like air for too long and then choke. He laughed softly and said that he has been choking for months. She felt the urge to reach across the table and place her hand on his. But she did not move. The boundary was a shoreline, sometimes clear, sometimes shifting. That afternoon, she received a message from Lydia requesting a joint meeting with legal and communication. "We want to align on risk and narrative," the email read, which translated to, "We want custody of the truth." In the conference room, the city stretched like a wet postcard behind glass. Lydia began with numbers and headlines and the kind of language that reduces humans to indices. Jonas followed with policy and the shape of accountability. Eliza kept her voice even and said privacy was non-negotiable. Lydia smiled and said privacy is the story we sell, not the one we tell. Jonas slid a document across the table, a consent addendum for exceptional review. Sign here and upload full sessions by end of day. Eliza heard her own heartbeat in her ears. Sirens far below threaded the air. She said she would review with counsel and stood to leave. Jonas did not stop her. He only said, "Be careful which side of the glass you stand on." Back in her office, she opened the drive where she had hidden the files. For a long minute, she stared at the folder name, felt the shape of her decision at the base of her throat, then closed the window and disconnected the device. She wrote a summary that was thorough but not invasive, detailed but not voyeuristic, then sent it to legal with a note about clinical discretion. The reply arrived 4 minutes later. Not sufficient. Raw files required. She picked up the phone to call her mentor from graduate school, then put it down. She called her mother, then hung up after 2 rings. She brewed tea she did not drink. When the sun slid behind the buildings, she felt as if she were a window, washed too often clear to everyone but herself. Nathan texted through the scheduling system to ask if there were any changes to the time for their next session. She typed no and deleted it, then typed yes and deleted that too, and finally wrote same time as always and added, "How are you sleeping?" He replied, "I am not, but the not is different," and she understood that a certain kind of ache had replaced the numbness. That evening she walked home along the water, listening to the city breathe. She thought of Nathan at that same hour, perhaps walking through rooms that echoed, perhaps stopping at the balcony where memory still lives. She thought of Jonas, of Lydia, of the way institutions digest people into purpose. She thought of her father at his desk, of the letter that could not hold, of how grief distorts and repeats until something interrupts it. When she reached her apartment, she opened her notebook and wrote a sentence that felt like both map and warning. Protecting a patient from a system can look like betrayal to the system, but neutrality in the face of harm is not ethics, it is surrender. The door buzzer startled her. A courier stood in the hallway, holding a small package with no return address. Inside was a book of poems she recognized from childhood, and a single page folded into quarters. The page held 3 words in neat handwriting: "For the living." There was no signature, but she did not need one. She pressed the page between her palms and let a breath go. She had been holding for years. Somewhere across the city, Nathan stood in front of a mirror without seeing himself. He touched the place on his chest where her words had landed the previous week and whispered them again. Remember her without punishment. He opened a drawer and removed the engagement ring he had never returned to the world. He set it on the counter under a small pool of light and said Clara out loud until the name felt like a river rather than a wound. In that moment, his phone lit with a call from an unknown number. He did not answer. He watched the name vanish and told himself he could face the next day without the old armor. Back at Mindwell, Jonas logged into a restricted console and scanned the audit trail. He saw the gap where a mirror path should have been and smiled a small, controlled smile. He drafted a notice to the board invoking compliance powers and another to legal authorizing direct collection. Then he wrote a private message to Lydia. If we force her hand, the narrative becomes hers. Better to let her make a choice she cannot defend. Lydia replied with a single line. The camera in the hallway still works. Eliza slept lightly that night and dreamed of a room with no door. In the morning, she woke with decision beneath her tongue. She would not surrender the tapes. She would not place a living person on the altar of procedure. She would risk her position before she risked his humanness. At the session that afternoon, Nathan arrived early again, carrying no umbrella in weather that demanded one. His hair was wet, his jaw set, his eyes clear. Before he sat, he asked if she had ever wanted to run away from a room she also wanted to live in. She said yes, and recognized instantly the double meaning in her own answer. He told her he had taken the ring out of a drawer for the first time, and that the world had not ended. She told him that breathing sometimes requires proof. He said he wanted to try an experiment to see whether memory could be remapped through words and movement, and she guided him through a simple grounding exercise, the naming of 5 things seen, 4 felt, 3 heard, 2 smelled, 1 tasted, till his breath steadied. He looked up like a swimmer finding the surface. It is quieter, he said. She nodded. For now. They sat without speaking for a full minute. The clock was gentle for once. When the session ended, he paused at the door and said thank you in a way that felt like the beginning of something ethically complicated and emotionally undeniable. After he left, she opened her notebook and wrote the sentence that had been forming all day. I am waiting for his sessions, and I know that means the mirror is working, and also that it is dangerous. She closed the book as footsteps approached. Jonas stood in the doorway without knocking eyes on the locked cabinet behind her desk. Hand over the files, he said, for the protection of the company and everyone in it. She kept her voice low. The company is not the patient. He stepped inside and shut the door. Then protect him by doing your job. She met his gaze and did not look away. My job is to keep the human being in front of me human. He smiled that same polite verdict. Then I suppose we will find out whose definition wins. When he left, she was shaking, but it was not fear. It was a choice gathering its weight. Outside, rain swept the city clean, and then dirtied it again, and the line between protection and betrayal thinned to a thread that would not hold for long. The morning it happened began like any other, a cup of coffee, cooling beside unread messages, the rain pressing against the office windows in tired repetition. Eliza arrived early, unaware that somewhere deep within Mindwell's servers, a thread of code was unraveling. She powered on her tablet, reviewed the day's appointments, and tried not to notice the silence from Jonas's office. Silence in this place usually meant trouble. At 9:17 a.m., her screen flickered. The session logs for patient Eero 7C blinked twice, then vanished. She blinked too, thinking it was fatigue, but within minutes her inbox exploded with alerts, urgent data exposure detected. Immediate compliance review required. And then one message from Lydia Stay off social media. The pit in her stomach widened as she opened a browser. Her own name hadn't appeared yet, but Nathan's had. Billionaire CEO seeking therapy for emotional dysfunction. The headline screamed across every feed. Under it, quotes from his session lines, only 2 people should have known. Her words, his confessions, torn from context and twisted into spectacle. She could barely breathe as she scrolled, watching the world disassemble their humanity into hashtags. Billionaire breakdown. Therapist affair. The internet was already scripting a romance that hadn't happened. Jonas's call came next. Hart, my office, now. She didn't have time to think. When she entered, he was pacing the newsfeed, playing soundlessly on a mounted screen. You, he said, pointing at her, like an accusation made of air. You're the only one with encrypted access. The leak came from your terminal. That's impossible, she said, voice thin. I removed the mirror path to protect. Exactly, he snapped. You interfered with the system. You broke the chain of custody. You made it possible. I was trying to prevent this, and yet here we are. He slid a printed document across the table. Legal will draft your statement. You'll take responsibility for procedural oversight. We'll frame it as negligence, not malice. The company will survive. You might even keep your license. You want me to lie, she said quietly. No, I want you to comply. His phone buzzed. He glanced at it and smiled without warmth. They're already circling Eliza. If we don't move fast, the board will throw both of us under the bus. She stared at him. You'd sacrifice me to save your image. He looked genuinely puzzled. This isn't about you. It's about survival. She left before the anger could burn through her professionalism. By noon, reporters were outside the building. Paparazzi waited near the parking garage. She used the back stairwell hands, trembling the tulips still on her desk like witnesses. At home, she shut the curtains and watched the storm roll in over the lake. Her phone buzzed endlessly. Calls from colleagues, voicemails from legal texts, from unknown numbers offering exclusive interviews. She turned it face down, but one message made her freeze. Nathan, they think you broke me, but you were the only one who didn't. For a moment, she couldn't move. Then another message followed. Stay where you are. I'm coming. She typed back, don't. It'll make things worse. But she knew he wouldn't listen. The news cycle had already devoured his privacy. Nothing else left to protect. When he arrived, soaked from the rain, she didn't open the door immediately. You shouldn't be here, she said through the intercom. You're on every network, so are you, he replied. Let me in. Against reason, she did. He stood dripping on the threshold, the city's storm framed behind him. His eyes were dark, fierce, alive. They turned my pain into profit, he said. And they're blaming you for it. I can handle it. No, you can't. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. They're calling you unprofessional, unstable. They're saying I paid you for more than therapy. Nathan, she warned. Don't. I won't let them destroy you for doing your job. She shook her head. You don't understand. If you defend me, it'll look like you're confirming the story. He laughed bitterly. They don't need confirmation. They just need blood. Then don't give it to them. What if it's already mine? The words hung there between thunder and silence. He looked around her apartment, small, quiet, full of books and warmth, and something in him softened. This is where you hide, he said. It's not hiding, it's surviving. It doesn't look like survival, it looks like exile. She met his eyes. Sometimes that's the same thing. He sat down exhausted. She brought him a towel and tea, hands trembling as she passed it to him. He took it, but didn't drink. "Jonas called me," he said finally. "He wants me to make a public statement distancing the company from the breach. He said if I cooperate, he'll minimize collateral damage." "Meaning you." Her voice broke. "What did you say?" I said no. "Nathan, that'll ruin you." "I don't care. You should." "And you shouldn't," he said quietly. "You've spent your whole life carrying other people's pain. Let me carry this one." She turned away, pressing her hands to the counter, trying to steady her breathing. "You don't owe me that. You didn't owe me anything either. But you stayed." A flash of lightning carved the room in half. He moved closer, stopping just short of touching her. "You told me once that healing begins when someone dares to speak. Maybe this is that moment. If you go public, they'll crucify you. They already have." "Then what are you hoping for? Truth," he said simply. "The kind that doesn't need permission." She closed her eyes. The air between them pulsed like a wound that refused to close. He reached for her hand, and this time she didn't pull away. His palm was warm, trembling. For a moment, it wasn't therapy, wasn't professionalism, wasn't forbidden. It was two people standing in the ruins of what the world expected and choosing to feel anyway. But before the quiet could settle, her phone buzzed again. A call from Jonas. She answered, and his voice was ice. "Heart, I hope you're alone, because if you're with him, this gets worse. Cameras caught him leaving the building. You're already trending again." She looked at Nathan, whose expression hardened. "You set us up." "No," Jonas said. "You set yourself up the moment you thought rules were optional." The line went dead. Outside sirens rose, not for them, but near enough to sound like consequence. Nathan grabbed his coat. "You need to stay here. I'll fix this." "How by telling the truth?" She shook her head, tears cutting through her restraint. "The truth doesn't matter. The story's already written. Then we'll write another one." He left before she could stop him. Hours later, the world had its spectacle, a billionaire on live television, soaked unshaven, speaking with the calm of a man who had nothing left to lose. "If caring for someone is a crime," he said, "then I plead guilty." Cameras flashed, anchors gasped. The internet exploded again, but this time not with mockery, but with something like awe. In her apartment, Eliza watched, unable to breathe. He wasn't confessing scandal. He was confessing humanity. "I built a company to help people feel," he said. "But somewhere along the way, we decided feeling was unprofessional. Maybe it's time to change that." When the broadcast ended, she turned off the TV and sat in darkness. Outside rain fell softer now, almost forgiving. She whispered to herself, "You should have let him lie." But deep down she knew truth was the only language he had left. The city pulsed with noise that night, a feverish rhythm of sirens, headlines, and screens. Yet inside Eliza's apartment, the air felt like the pause between heartbeats. She sat on the floor, surrounded by papers, statements, and unanswered emails. The world had declared her guilty without trial. But what haunted her most wasn't the loss of reputation. It was the look in Nathan's eyes before he walked away. Hours had passed since his public confession, and still she hadn't heard from him. She replayed the broadcast again, watching the faint tremor in his voice when he said her name without saying it. "If caring for someone is a crime," the words echoed through her like thunder rolling backward. At midnight, a knock broke the silence. For a moment, she thought it was the police or a journalist, But when she looked through the peephole, she saw him. Nathan stood drenched in rain. No cameras this time, no crowd, no script. Just a man stripped bare of everything except truth. She opened the door slowly. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered, but he was already stepping inside. His clothes clung to him. His breath was visible in the cold air. "They suspended me," he said, effective immediately. "Nathan." "It's okay. I needed to lose something real to remember what mattered." She hesitated, then offered a towel. "You can't stay," she said. "If someone sees." "There's no one left to see," he said softly. "They've seen enough." He sank onto the couch, head in hands, and for the first time, she saw the exhaustion, not as weakness, but as honesty. She sat across from him, the space between them, a fragile line neither wanted to cross. "You shouldn't have done that," she said. "They'll destroy you for protecting me." He looked up, eyes steady. Maybe destruction is the only honest beginning. She wanted to argue, but there was something about the way he said it. Calm, measured like a man, finally speaking in his native tongue that silenced her. "What happens now?" she asked. Now he leaned back, staring at the ceiling. "Now we stop pretending this is about rules." "It has to be," she said, voice trembling. "Otherwise, everything we stand for falls apart." "Then maybe it should." His words startled her. "You don't mean that?" "I do," he said. "We built systems to manage pain, Eliza, but we forgot what it means to feel it." "Feeling doesn't fix the world," she said. "It only breaks people faster." He smiled sadly. "Maybe the breaking is the fixing." The clock ticked in slow defiance of logic. The rain softened, became whisper instead of roar. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the folded page she had once written a line from her notes he must have seen during a session when she wasn't careful. "You wrote," he read quietly, "sometimes empathy is the only thing that keeps people alive." "You kept me alive." She shook her head, tears burning behind her eyes. "You kept yourself alive." "No," he said. "You gave me permission to try." The air between them changed. It wasn't charged with romance, but something deeper, raw, a recognition of two people who had outlived their own defenses. She moved to the window, needing distance, but he followed. "Why does it scare you so much?" he asked. "Because it feels real," she said, "and real things don't survive in our world. Then we'll make another world." "Don't romanticize this," she said. "You're grieving and I'm human," he interrupted. "You're human. That's the only thing we still have." She turned ready to protest, but the sight of him stopped her. His face was illuminated by the city lights bleeding through the rain, his eyes softer now. Without thinking, she reached up and brushed a strand of wet hair from his forehead. He caught her hand not to hold it, but to keep her from pulling away. "Eliza," he whispered, "I built a company to heal others because I didn't believe anyone could heal me, and now I'm standing in front of the person who did." The words shattered something inside her. She wanted to tell him to leave to protect what little of her career was left, but she couldn't. Instead, she said the only truth left to say. "It's still beating," she murmured, placing a hand over his chest. "You're still here." He covered her hand with his, their fingers trembling together. They didn't kiss. They didn't need to. The intimacy wasn't in touch, it was in recognition. The sound of the rain filled the space where fear used to live. Time folded. His shoulders eased for the first time in years. Her breath evened, her pulse slowed, and somewhere between them, silence became sanctuary. "What happens tomorrow?" he asked quietly. Tomorrow, she said, we face the consequences. Together she met his eyes. Together, he smiled, weary but certain. Then whatever happens tonight was worth it. They stayed like that for a long while. Not lovers, not therapist and patient, but two people finely unarmored. When he left before dawn, the world outside still shimmered with rain. She stood by the door, listening to the echo of his footsteps fading down the hall. She should have felt dread, but what filled her instead was a strange, calm clarity. The feeling of someone who had stepped across every line and found herself still whole. Later that morning, Mindwell issued a statement, denying any personal involvement between staff and clients, calling the viral story a distortion of clinical integrity. They reinstated Jonas as interim director and placed Eliza on administrative leave pending investigation. She read it once, expression unreadable. Then she turned off her phone. Her voicemail was full, her inbox overflowing, but she didn't care. Somewhere out there, Nathan was facing his own storm stripped of title investors' prestige. And yet, for the first time, he wasn't alone. That night changed everything, not because it rewrote their story, but because it reminded them they were more than characters in one. Before sleeping, Eliza opened her notebook and wrote her final session note under patient 07C. Treatment suspended indefinitely, emotional connection established, outcome uncertain but human. She closed the book and placed it on her nightstand next to the white tulip she'd pressed between pages to keep from fading. Outside the rain began again, but softer this time, like applause. Morning broke with headlines instead of sunlight. Therapist crosses line with billionaire client, one read. Inside the forbidden sessions, said another. By the time Eliza left her apartment, her face was everywhere cropped. From company headshots splashed across thumbnails beside Nathan's name. The world didn't need proof. It needed entertainment, and she had unwillingly become its favorite scandal. Outside Mindwell's headquarters, reporters swarmed like bees around glass. She tried to enter quietly through the side door, but security stopped her. Dr. Hart, one guard, said softly, "We were told to revoke your badge." Her throat closed. "By who, Jonas Vale?" he said, not meeting her eyes. "I'm sorry." She turned away before anyone could see the tears. Beside her phone messages, multiplied calls from ethics boards, legal departments, news outlets demanding comment. Each one was a nail tightening the frame around her reputation. She wanted to explain, to shout that nothing inappropriate had happened, but she knew the truth had lost its audience. Truth was quiet. Scandal sold. That afternoon, she met with the disciplinary committee in a sterile conference room. 3 officials sat across from her, eyes heavy with practiced neutrality. Dr. Hart, the chair, began, "You're accused of breaching professional ethics and confidentiality in relation to patient 07C Nathan Cole." "I didn't leak those files," she said, "and I never crossed a boundary." "Then how do you explain his public confession, his appearance at your residence, the footage of you together?" Her stomach dropped. Footage. The woman in the middle adjusted her glasses. A security camera in your building caught him entering late at night. The video was sold to the press. Eliza felt the blood drain from her face. "You think that means we think the chair interrupted it? Raises reasonable doubt about your judgment." She wanted to fight, but exhaustion dulled her voice. "He was hurting. He came to me because the system failed him." "And you became the system," the woman replied. "That's the danger." The hearing adjourned after 20 minutes. They said they'd be in touch regarding her license. As she stepped outside, the air smelled of wet pavement and burnt coffee, the city's indifferent heartbeat pounding around her. Across town, Nathan faced his own tribunal, a boardroom filled with lawyers, investors, and journalists demanding accountability. Lydia sat beside him, performing remorse with precision. "We can rebuild," she said to the board, "but we must first separate Mr. Cole's personal actions from the company's mission." He cut her off. "You mean from your narrative?" "Our narrative," she corrected, smiling. "You hired me to protect your image, Nathan, not your feelings." "Then you failed," he said. The room froze. Cameras clicked. He turned toward the board. "If caring for a person disqualifies me from leading a company built on empathy, then maybe the problem isn't me. It's what we've turned empathy into." The board voted to remove him by majority. He signed the papers quietly, then walked out into the drizzle free for the first time in years, and uncertain what freedom cost. That evening, Eliza returned to her apartment to find the door slightly ajar. For a terrifying second, she thought someone had broken in. But then she saw a familiar envelope on her desk. Inside was her Mindwell ID, snapped clean down the middle, and a note in Jonas's handwriting. "We warned you about boundaries. No signature, no sympathy, just a closing statement." She sat on the couch, staring at the fractured ID, until her vision blurred. Her phone buzzed once. "Nathan, meet me at the pier," the message read. "Please." The wind off Lake Union carried the scent of rain and iron when she arrived. He was waiting near the railing, coat collar, turned up eyes unreadable. "You shouldn't have come," she said. "Neither should you," he answered. For a moment they just stood there. Two people, stripped of titles and armor, the city lights trembling across the water. They took everything, she whispered. "My license, my reputation. They took my company," he said. "So maybe we're even." She laughed brokenly. "That's not how equality works. Maybe not. But it's a start." He took a step closer. "You once told me healing doesn't mean fixing people. It means forgiving ourselves. Do you still believe that I don't know what I believe anymore? Then believe this," he said. "You did nothing wrong." "Nathan." "No," he cut in. "You followed your heart in a system that punishes humanity. That's not wrong, that's courage." She shook her head. "They'll never see it that way. They don't have to." He reached into his pocket and placed a small object in her palm, the engagement ring he'd once shown her in confession. "You said forgiveness begins when you stop punishing yourself," he murmured. "I'm done punishing." "This isn't mine," she said, trying to return it. "It was never hers, either," he replied. "It's a symbol. Keep it so you don't forget what tonight means." She looked down at the ring water, glinting on the stone like captured light. "What does it mean that falling isn't failure?" he said softly. "It's gravity reminding us we're still human." The words broke her. She reached for him, not to hold, but to steady. He caught her arms, and for the first time since everything began, they both stopped fighting the pull of silence. Somewhere far off, sirens wailed again, this time not as threat, but as reminder. The world kept turning, even when they couldn't. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now we disappear for a while," he said. "Not to hide, to heal." She nodded the smallest motion, but it carried the weight of surrender. As they walked away from the pier, the rain finally stopped. Behind them, the city gleamed cold, bright, merciless, beautiful. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time in months, she wasn't afraid of falling. The storm of consequence came quietly this time. No lightning, no sirens. Just the low hum of inevitability. It began with a subpoena, A thin envelope slid under Eliza's apartment door, summoning her to testify before a federal ethics panel investigating the Mindwell data breach. By the next morning, the city's news feeds carried fresh headlines: Government launches inquiry into Billionaire's therapy scandal. She read them once, folded the paper, and stared at the white tulip on her nightstand that had somehow not wilted. Across town, Nathan sat in a borrowed apartment, overlooking the same gray water, watching the public dissection of his life with strange calm. He had stopped defending himself in interviews, stopped fighting the noise. For days, Lydia had run her campaign, spinning new narratives, how he'd fabricated the therapy sessions for sympathy, how Eliza had manipulated him for fame. It was relentless, strategic, and convincing. But Jonas had been silent. That silence felt heavier than any accusation. On the morning of the hearing, the courtroom filled with journalists, lawyers, and officials in dark suits. Eliza sat at the table, fingers cold, despite the heat of the cameras. Jonas sat opposite, posture, immaculate eyes polished like marble. When the chairman asked him to state his role, he began with ease. As Chief Operations Officer at Mindwell, my responsibility was to ensure the security of all patient data. Unfortunately, one of our employees failed to uphold the necessary protocols. He turned toward Eliza. Dr. Hart's negligence allowed confidential files to be compromised. A murmur rippled through the room. Eliza wanted to shout, to expose every manipulation, but before she could speak, the door opened at the back of the chamber. Nathan entered unannounced in a dark suit that no longer fit his former life. Cameras flashed. The chairman frowned. "Mr. Cole, this is a closed proceeding." "Then make it open," he said, walking forward. "Because what's being judged here isn't her ethics, it's our humanity." He stopped beside Eliza, placed a folded document on the table, and faced Jonas. "You said she compromised data," Nathan said evenly. "Then explain this." The clerk unfolded the papers, internal emails, timestamps, security logs. Proof that Jonas had approved the mirrored backup that enabled the breach and later authorized its deletion to frame Eliza when the scandal broke. Gasps filled the room. The chairman turned to Jonas. "Is this true?" Jonas's calm faltered. "Those documents are confidential company property, and you leaked them." Nathan interrupted, "To protect your reputation and the board's stock value." Lydia, sitting in the gallery, rose abruptly. "Nathan, stop. You're destroying yourself." "No," he said. "I'm freeing myself." He turned back to the panel. "I built Mindwell to make people feel safe again. Instead, we built a machine that profits from pain." Dr. Hart tried to remind us what empathy looks like. "She broke your rules, yes, but only because your rules forgot why they existed." The room fell silent. The chairman leaned forward. "Mr. Cole, are you admitting liability?" "I'm admitting guilt," he said, "but not hers, mine." Eliza closed her eyes as a tear escaped despite her restraint. The rest happened in a blur. Jonas tried to argue. "Chain of command," Lydia whispered damage control into her phone, and reporters outside began posting fragments of Nathan's testimony before the hearing even ended. By the time the panel adjourned, the narrative had shifted completely. The investigation widened to include Mindwell's executives. Jonas resigned within 24 hours. Lydia deleted her social media accounts. Nathan walked out of the courthouse into a swarm of cameras and said only one sentence: "We built systems to cure feelings, but humanity was never the illness." The clip went viral within hours. Hashtags shifted from condemnation to compassion. "Be Human First" trended worldwide. That evening, Eliza returned home to find a letter taped to her door, handwritten, not typed. It was from the ethics board. Pending further review, it read, "Your license is provisionally reinstated." She sank to the floor and let herself cry, for the first time in months, not from guilt, but relief. Across the city, Nathan sat on a bench overlooking the water, anonymous again. His phone buzzed with offers from talk shows, podcasts, and publishers, all wanting the redemption story. He ignored them all. He stared at the skyline until it blurred, then took out his phone and typed one message. "It's over." A reply came a few minutes later. "No, Nathan, it's beginning." That night she found him at the pier where everything had fallen apart. The rain had stopped, the air calm, the water glassy as a mirror. He looked up when she approached, exhaustion and peace blending in his expression. "You shouldn't have done that," she said softly. "You shouldn't have saved me like that." He shook his head. "I didn't save you. I just told the truth. It cost you everything. Then it was worth it." She sat beside him. For a long time, neither spoke. The city hummed behind them, indifferent but alive. Finally, she said, "What now? Now we rebuild," he said. "Not Mindwell. Something better. Something honest. And what if the world forgets? Then we remind it again." He smiled faintly, eyes reflecting the water. "Forgiveness isn't a destination, Eliza. It's maintenance. Every day you choose it again." She looked at him and saw not the billionaire, not the patient, but the man who had finally learned to feel. "So what do you call this?" she asked quietly. "Exposure," he said, "but not the kind that ruins, the kind that lets light in." They stayed there until dawn, the horizon turning from iron to silver. When the first rays touched their faces, Eliza whispered, "It's still beating." He smiled, hand over his heart. "So is yours." And for the first time, neither of them flinched from the feeling. The letter began as a confession and ended as a prayer. Eliza had rewritten it a dozen times, each version softer than the last, each one meant to be sent, but never was. It sat in her drawer beside the pressed tulip, the paper folded, like something fragile that might break if touched. It had been 1 year since the hearing. She no longer lived in the glass apartment that smelled of antiseptic success. Instead, she rented a small flat above a bookstore in Queen Anne, where the scent of old pages and rain became her daily therapy. Her mornings belonged to coffee and quiet, her afternoons to the community center that had once been an abandoned library. She taught group sessions, now teenagers struggling with identity veterans, haunted by dreams, single mothers carrying invisible weights. Healing had found her again, only this time it wasn't wrapped in clinical distance. It was messy, loud, beautifully human. The world had moved on from the scandal. Mindwell rebranded under new management. Jonas disappeared into consultancy work in another state. Lydia resurfaced with a podcast about emotional resilience. Nathan Cole, however, had vanished from public view. Occasionally, his name appeared in small articles about philanthropic donations made anonymously to therapy initiatives, but otherwise he'd become a ghost in a city that once worshipped him. Still, on certain evenings when the rain fell a certain way, she felt him near like memory in motion. That night, sitting by her window, she finally finished the letter. "Dear Nathan, it's strange writing to someone who already knows the parts of me I used to hide. I once thought healing meant fixing others. You taught me it means forgiving ourselves. I don't know where you are, but I hope it's somewhere quiet, somewhere with sunlight and air that doesn't taste of regret. The world remembers you for the fall, not the climb, But I remember the man who sat in silence until he learned to breathe again. I remember your confession, the one that wasn't about loneliness or control, but about the ache of being human. Thank you for trusting me with it. You said once that connection doesn't need permission. Maybe that's why I can still feel it now. There's something you should know. The foundation you dreamed of your idea for free therapy access is real. It exists now under your name but through my hands. The Heart Foundation, they call it. I know you'd argue it should bear your name instead, but I wanted it to be something we built together, even if separately. Every child who learns to breathe again, every veteran who sleeps through the night, carries a fragment of your redemption. They just don't know it. That's what healing is, isn't it? Quiet victories that never make the news. I still keep the ring you gave me, not as a symbol of love, but of truth. It reminds me that some things are meant to stay unfinished. Maybe that's how they stay real. If you ever read this, I hope you know I don't regret a single moment. Not the sessions, not the storm, not the fall. I'd rather lose 1,000 careers than unlearn what we discovered, that boundaries may protect us, but compassion saves us. Wherever you are, I hope you're free. Eliza. She signed her name softly, folded the page, and placed it in an envelope without an address. It joined the others she'd written to him over the months, each one unsent. Each one a chapter of her own recovery. Outside the city exhaled mist over the harbor. Lights shimmered like quiet prayers on the water. Somewhere out there, she imagined Nathan might be standing by another window, reading some version of the same truth in his own handwriting. That same night, in a small office overlooking Portland's riverfront, Nathan finished drafting a proposal for a new initiative, the Heart Foundation, a partnership to provide mental health care for those who couldn't afford it. He paused before signing the papers, remembering her voice. It's still beating. He smiled, a quiet echo of peace crossing his face, and whispered to no one, "Yes, it is." He didn't know that hundreds of miles away, she had written those same words hours earlier. The universe, it seemed, had learned their rhythm. In her small apartment, Eliza blew out the candle and whispered the last line of her letter to the empty room. Some people meet once and keep finding each other in the spaces they leave behind. The flame flickered out, leaving only the sound of rain tapping the glass like a heartbeat. The lecture hall smelled faintly of rain and paper, the kind of scent that carried memory more than time. 2 years had passed since the scandal, yet the story still lived quietly beneath the surface of those who had been changed by it. The Heart Foundation had grown from one room into a national network of therapy centers, each built on the same principle that had once cost her everything. Healing begins when someone dares to feel. On that spring afternoon, Eliza stood at the front of a small community hall, facing 20 students seated in a semicircle. Some were psychology majors, others volunteers who had stumbled in searching for purpose. On the whiteboard behind her were 4 words written in black marker, "The Psychology of Stillness." She smiled gently. Stillness, she said, is not the absence of thought. It's the courage to stay when everything inside you wants to run. Her voice carried a calm steadiness that came only from surviving chaos. When I first started this work, I believed healing meant finding answers. But over time, I learned it's more about learning to stay with the questions. The students listened closely, their faces reflecting something she recognized: hope mixed with uncertainty. She walked slowly between the rows, her hands folded loosely. Stillness is what allows us to see each other clearly. It's what makes empathy possible. And empathy, she paused, isn't a technique. It's a decision. Outside sunlight drifted through the tall windows, scattering across the floorboards in pale gold patterns. It was the first clear day Seattle had seen in weeks. As she continued speaking, a figure entered quietly through the back door. She didn't notice at first. He stood by the wall, hands in pockets, listening. Nathan Cole looked different now. His hair was shorter, the sharp lines of his jaw softened by time. The world had forgotten his name, but his presence still carried the quiet gravity of someone who had walked through fire and learned not to fear the burn. When she concluded her session, applause filled the room. The students began packing their notes, approaching her with shy questions and gratitude. She answered each warmly, her tone patient, maternal almost. Then, when the last student had gone, she turned toward the back and froze. He was still standing there, the sunlight behind him, outlining his silhouette, like a memory come alive. "You're late," she said softly, her voice steady, but her hands trembling slightly. He smiled, that same small half-smile that had undone her once before. "It's been 8 months again," he said quietly. She laughed, startled by the simplicity of it. "Good. It means you're still counting." He walked closer, slow and deliberate, as if afraid the distance between them might vanish too quickly. "I wasn't sure you'd want to see me," he said. "You shouldn't have doubted." "I've doubted everything," he admitted, except that. They stood face to face now, close enough that she could see the faint lines at the corners of his eyes, proof of living, not aging. "You built something incredible," he said, glancing around the hall. "No," she corrected gently. "We did. You gave it the name." "I gave it guilt," he said. "You turned it into grace." She shook her head. "You gave it courage." Silence stretched between them, but it was comfortable this time, the kind of silence that felt like home. He looked around at the chairs, the books, the walls, adorned with hand-drawn posters from children who had been through the program. "You did it," he said again, softer now. "You made stillness possible, and you made feelings safe again." Their eyes met, and for a long time, neither looked away. "Do you ever miss it?" he asked finally. "What?" "The noise, the rush, the illusion that if you build enough walls, you'll never be hurt again." She smiled. "Sometimes. But then I remember that the only reason we build walls is to see who's willing to climb them. And I climbed." "And you fell," she said gently. "And you got back up," he countered. A small laugh escaped her. "We sound like two people who finally stopped being afraid of what broke us." "Maybe we are." She turned toward the window, watching the lake shimmer under the sunlight. "It's strange," she said. "Sometimes I think about that night, the one that changed everything, and I realize it wasn't about falling in love. It was about remembering we were alive." "You saved me," he said quietly. "No," she replied. "You finally let yourself be saved." He moved beside her, both of them, facing the light now. "I was thinking," he said, "about teaching again. Not technology, people, how to feel, how to lead with something other than fear. You'd be good at it, only if you help." She looked at him uncertain. "Together again." "Not as before," I said, "this time as equals." She considered the offer, the weight and grace of it. "There's a class starting next month," she said. "They could use a guest speaker." "I'll bring tulips," he replied. White, always white. The quiet between them deepened, rich and full. For the first time in years, there was no tension, only peace. "Do you ever wonder," He asked softly if healing ever ends. No, she said, and that's the point. It keeps us moving. He nodded. Then maybe that's what love is. The kind that doesn't end. The kind that keeps you human. Maybe, she whispered. They stood like that as the hall emptied of sound. The sunlight shifted, sliding across the wooden floor until it reached their hands resting on the same desk. Without a word, he turned his palm upward. She placed hers in it. Their fingers intertwined, not with hunger or urgency, but with the gentle certainty of two people who had already lived through the hardest parts of themselves. Outside, the lake glimmered with the pale shimmer of afternoon. The city moved unaware, alive. Inside the hall, time slowed to stillness. She closed her eyes and whispered almost to herself. Sometimes healing isn't a cure. It's a return to feeling alive again. He squeezed her hand once, as if to promise that this time they would not let go. The light through the window touched them both, and for the first time since that night, it felt like forgiveness. If this story moved something in you, if you paused, breathed, or felt a little less alone, then stay with us. Subscribe not just for more stories, but for reminders of what we often forget, that even in a world built on speed and noise, there's still room for silence, grace, and second chances. Every week on this channel, we bring you cinematic stories about the quiet wars we fight, inside the kind that don't make headlines but change lives. Stories about love that heals instead of hurts, about people who rebuild after everything breaks, about kindness that finds its way back home. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from, because this story, like all the others, isn't complete without you. If you've ever carried guilt, if you've ever felt invisible, if you've ever whispered your truth into the dark and hoped someone was listening, this space is for you. We make these films for the ones who stay up at night, wondering if they'll ever feel again, for the ones who choose empathy when the world rewards indifference. So if that's you, hit the like button, share this with someone who needs to be reminded that healing is not weakness. And remember, every view, every comment, every message of hope helps this community grow. It tells the algorithm, yes, even that cold machine, that people still care about humanity, about softness, about stories that reach deeper than the scroll. And if you've been here before, thank you. If you're new, welcome home. Because this isn't just a channel. It's a journal of souls trying to stay kind in a world that keeps forgetting how. Until the next story, stay gentle, stay brave, and never stop believing that feeling is the most powerful form of strength.